Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar 2019 Toxic Release Inventory, TRI, National Analysis, Highlights and Walkthrough. We're happy you could join us today. This webinar is 90 minutes long. The first 45 minutes will be presentation, followed by 45 minutes of question and answer. Presenters from EPA will highlight the findings from the most recent data about industrial management of toxic chemicals. This webinar will briefly cover the basics of the TRI program, explain key findings from EPA's analysis of the 2019 TRI data, and explore features of the interactive National Analysis Report. You will also learn how to easily get summary data for any U.S. location. Before we get into the webinar presentation, I want to review a few webinar software tips. First, there are 3 ways to connect with the audio today. You can either listen through your computer speakers, use the Call Me feature to receive an automated call from WebEx, or use the number posted on the webinar slide. All participant lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar, regardless of the audio method that you choose. We will be using 2 panels for today's webinar, the chat panel and the question and answer panel. We may be putting information like relevant links into the chat panel for easy access. However, please note that you as attendees will not be able to send messages using the chat panel. However, you can submit questions using the question and answer panel, which I will explain more in a minute. Both panels can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. You may need to click the arrow next to the desired panel to expand and see all of the content. If for some reason one of the panels does not appear, navigate to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and click on the panels that you are missing. You can participate in today's webinar through questions and answers. Throughout the duration of the webinar, you can enter questions into the Q&A panel. However, we will not be answering questions until the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. When submitting questions, please select All Panelists from the drop-down menu before hitting Send, and this will ensure that all of the speakers see your question. As I mentioned, questions will be moderated at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. Following the event, the webinar materials will be made available on the TRI website, and you can see that link here on the screen. With that, I will pass it over to Steve DeVito from EPA for some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve DeVito. I'm Chief of the Data Analysis and Dissemination Branch at the US EPA in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for listening in on our presentation on the 2019 Toxics Release Inventory National Analysis. It's wonderful to have you with us today, and we prepared a really great presentation, and we're very excited to present it to you. Many of you probably already know that the Toxics Release Inventory is a public database that contains information on releases and other waste management quantities of toxic chemicals that are reported to the EPA by facilities in your community or in your county, your state, as well as facilities throughout the United States. What you may not know is that the TRI is a unique source of information in that it is multimedia in its content. It contains information on releases of chemicals to air, land, and water, in addition to other waste management quantities. It also contains information on pollution prevention activities that have been implemented by industry and the environmental benefits of these activities. And the TRI, I want to stress that the TRI is intended to empower you, the public, not EPA, but you, the public, to make informed decisions about the consequences of waste management activities that are going on in your communities. And that's why we at EPA, we always strive to optimize access and analysis of TRI data for use by the public. And we have a whole suite of well-developed tools that are available from our website. By the way, this year, 2021, is especially noteworthy for the EPA's TRI program. The TRI will celebrate its 35th anniversary in October. This October 17th marks the 35th anniversary of the passage of the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act, which is the act that established the toxics release inventory. And that, as you will see and hear today in our presentation, through sophisticated data analyses and graphics and use of visualization technology, the TRI national analysis characterizes trends and releases and waste management practices, as well as the environmental benefits from implementation of pollution prevention activities. And now I'd like to turn it over to Caitlin Briere. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce my colleague, Caitlin Briere, who will present today's webinar on the national analysis. Caitlin directs the development of EPA's annual national analysis. She's also very involved with directing some of the TRI program's international activities. She represents the United States, for example, on the OECD's Working Group on Pollutant Release and Transfer Registers, and she's also serves as a vice chair on this group. She is currently acting as the Associate Branch Chief of EPA's Data Analysis and Dissemination Branch. Caitlin received her Bachelor of Science degree from Cornell University, and she received her Master of Public Policy degree from Georgetown University. Prior to joining EPA, Caitlin worked for the National Park Service and also with the Department of the Interior. She's been here at EPA with us for, I think, at least 10, 11 years. We depend on Caitlin for a lot of things. Caitlin, I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Steve, for that great introduction. And thank you everyone for joining us today to learn a little bit more about our most recent TRI National Analysis Report. And with that, I'm going to dive into the slides. So just as a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today, I will start with a brief introduction to what TRI is, in case we have anyone on this webinar who is less familiar with TRI as a program and what the data set contains. Then I'll go through the reporting year 2019 TRI National Analysis data highlights and some new additions to the report this year. And I'll show you our updated interactive web-based report, which we try to improve upon each year, and highlight some of the new features there in walking through the website itself and providing a demonstration of some of the data access tools that we've included in the website. And then, as was mentioned earlier, we will have lots of time for questions and answers towards the end of the presentation. So please feel free to type any questions you have as they arise into your Q&A box, and we will be addressing them at the end of the webinar. So to start at the beginning, why was the Toxics Release Inventory created? The Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act that Steve mentioned earlier, that was passed in 1986, was in large part a response to a chemical accident that occurred in Bhopal, India in December of 1984, in which methyl isocyanate gas was accidentally released at a Union Carbide chemical plant. And this accidental release resulted in thousands of fatalities immediately following the event, as well as thousands more fatalities and long-term injuries in the years since then in the area. The very next year in Institute, West Virginia, there was a smaller scale release at a similar chemical facility that was also owned by Union Carbide that resulted in the hospitalization of over 100 people. And so not surprisingly, these events increased concern in the United States about chemical accident preparedness and the availability of information of what toxic chemicals are in place at industrial facilities around the country. And so the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act was passed in the fall of 1986 in response to these events. And that act, EPCRA, created the Toxics Release Inventory, which tracks the waste management of certain chemicals that may pose a threat to human health and the environment, and includes information on the releases of that chemical waste, as well as the transfers between facilities of waste that contains TRI chemicals. And then, because of the Pollution Prevention Act, of 1990, there's additional information about how chemical waste is managed through things like recycling, treatment, burning for energy recovery, as well as pollution prevention initiatives that facilities undertake to not just reduce their releases of chemical waste, but prevent the generation of that waste in the first place. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. So when we say release, we use this word a lot in talking about TRI, of course, and the term release refers to the different ways that TRI chemicals from industrial facilities enter the air, water, and land. And the word release covers a lot of different methods of emissions, discharge, disposal, dumping, releasing, etc., that all result in chemicals being released to these environmental media. The likelihood of any members of the public coming into contact or being affected with these TRI chemical releases depends on the type of release, as well as many other factors, such as the type of chemical, its toxicity, how it is released from the facility. So for more information about releases, as well as definitions of other common TRI terms, we have a link here that goes to our glossary of terms. And just so everyone is aware, these slides are already posted on the National Analysis homepage. And so you can go to the homepage and access all of this information and these links whenever you like. And when we get to the web demo, I will show you where on the website these slides are located. So what makes a facility report to TRI? There are 3 reporting criteria that must be met for a facility to be required to report to TRI. First, that facility must be in a TRI covered industry sector or category, and those covered sectors include manufacturing facilities, electric generating facilities that burn coal and or oil to produce electricity, certain mining facilities, hazardous waste management facilities, as well as federal facilities. Second, the facility must have the equivalent of at least 10 full-time employees. And third, the facility must manufacture, process, or otherwise use more than a certain threshold amount of a covered TRI chemical per year. And those thresholds do vary depending on the chemical. For example, chemicals that are determined to be PBTs or persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals have a lower reporting threshold than non-PBT chemicals, as an example. So when a facility reports to TRI, that report includes the quantities of their on-site releases of the covered TRI chemicals to air, water, and land. It also includes information about any transfers of their chemical waste to another location, as well as information about how they have managed chemical waste in addition to releasing, which is a type of management. Facilities also report on how much they have recycled of their waste, how much was treated, as well as any that was burned for energy recovery. And there are different codes reported that tell us about the different methods of waste management that they have employed. As I mentioned earlier, because of the Pollution Prevention Act, they also report their pollution prevention activities. So any new initiatives or projects that they have undertaken that fall under the category of source reduction are also reported to TRI each year. So TRI, as I'm sure you can tell at this point, includes a lot of information. So you might be curious about who uses this information that we provide on an annual basis. So we've included some examples, and just to note that these are just some examples out of many. But for example, community members, members of the public often use TRI release and other management information through the portable customized fact sheets that we provide, as well as our interactive mapping tools and various search interfaces, some of which I'll be showing you during the demonstration portion of today's webinar. Our industry stakeholders, the facilities and companies themselves, use TRI information to look at pollution prevention success stories and to learn how other facilities in their industrial sector have reduced their releases. We also provide parent company comparisons that are of interest to our industry stakeholders, as well as facility rankings each year. Academic researchers use our data to do various research projects. We provide our data in downloadable spreadsheets and other types of files to be used in research projects. We have some very powerful search tools that allow researchers to download customized cuts of TRI data, as well as some very cool interactive data visualization applications and dashboards that are used to create customized presentations of data. Steve mentioned in his introduction that we do quite a bit of internationally focused work within the TRI program. Our international stakeholders include organizations such as the OECD and the United Nations that use the US's TRI data in conjunction with other countries' pollutant release and transfer registered data to undertake harmonization efforts to try to improve the comparability of different countries' data sets that are similar to TRI. They also use the US's TRI program and TRI data as an example for countries that are looking to start their own PRTR programs that are modeled after TRI. Our own, within the EPA, our own regional offices use our TRI information to look at what releases and waste management data look like within their regions. We have regional focus fact sheets that are used. We also have our data quality efforts with which the regional TRI coordinators are very involved that help to ensure that the TRI quality is of the highest value to our data users. And within our own Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics, which is where the TRI program sits within EPA, other parts of OPPT use TRI data extensively in their risk evaluations and pollution prevention program activities. The Office of Air and Radiation at EPA uses TRI to fill in gaps in the National Air Toxics Assessment data set and to track some of the ozone depleting substances, some of which are covered under TRI. And finally, the Office of Research and Development uses TRI data in one of its indicators in the report on the environment. And there are various other examples across the agency as well. So one thing that we try to remind people of is that there are a lot of considerations to keep in mind when using TRI data. Obviously, we think that TRI data is a very high quality and a very usable data set that has a lot of value, but as with any data set, there are considerations that help to ensure the data are being used appropriately. So for example, the 2019 TRI National Analysis reflects data on the management, which includes releases of chemical waste that occurred in calendar year 2019. And so for this year in particular, we want to remind users that this does not yet reflect any impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, since that did not begin in the US until early 2020. So any potential impacts, if they are reflected in TRI data, will be in the next year's data set. That is due to EPA on July 1st. TRI does not include information about public exposure to the chemicals reported to the TRI program. The data indicate annual totals that were released and otherwise managed by facilities, but we don't know about how those quantities may or may not have resulted in public exposure. TRI covers an important subset of the chemicals that are managed at US facilities, but it does not cover all chemicals that are used across the US or all facilities that are using TRI chemicals. As I mentioned earlier, a facility must be in a covered sector in order to report. And so there are sectors that are not covered by TRI that may also be using TRI covered chemicals. The data each year reflect annual totals and don't indicate the frequency or duration of a release, simply how much in total was released over the course of the calendar year in question. Also, the toxicity of the chemicals on the TRI list vary. Some are more toxic than others. And so that factors into how release quantities can or should be interpreted. And then finally, just as a reminder that facility operations and releases are regulated under other EPA programs with requirements that are designed to limit human and environmental harm. And so the vast majority of chemical releases that are reported to TRI are permitted legal releases. We are in general not talking about accidental or illegal or mismanaged chemical pollution here. Most of the TRI releases are permitted under other EPA programs. And then this document that is linked at the bottom of the slide, Factors to Consider When Using TRI Data, is an incredibly rich resource for anyone who is looking to use the data for any type of project or inquiry. There's a lot of very, very helpful guidance about how to use the TRI data set in that document, so I highly recommend checking it out. The TRI data cycle is an annual cycle. As I've mentioned earlier, TRI is reported to the EPA. TRI information is reported to the EPA each year. The deadline for facilities to report their TRI forms is July 1st of the year following the reporting year. So for example, we are quickly approaching that date now. So the forms that are due to EPA on July 1st of this year will reflect TRI data for calendar year 2020. Then about 3 weeks after that July 1st reporting form, we release the preliminary data set, which is just that very first version of the TRI data set that we received by July 1st. Then EPA conducts data quality checks with the assistance of our regional coordinators and provides compliance assistance activities throughout the rest of the summer and into the fall. And the data set is refreshed with any revisions or late submissions that come in from facilities that increase the quality of that data set. And then in October, the data is frozen to enable us to then spend the next few months developing the national analysis based on the October version of the data. And then national analysis development happens over the rest of the fall and into the winter, and we release the national analysis early the following year. And so that is why we are talking about 2019 TRI data as we sit here in the summer of 2021. And so the reporting year 2020 forms will come into EPA by next month. We will spend the summer doing our data quality, and the 2020 national analysis will be released in the first part of 2022. So what is the national analysis? EPA makes TRI data available through several different online tools and other sources, including its national analysis. This is one of the resources that we make available. The national analysis is our annual publication that summarizes TRI data for the most recent reporting cycle, and it compares the most recent year to previous years, usually going back about a decade, to identify different trends in the data over time, and it presents the agency's interpretation and summary of the data. And so this is, most of the national analysis is at that national scope, but we do have some sections that take a more localized approach, such as our regional profile, or that look at just a specific subset of the data, such as where we look at specific chemicals or specific industry sectors, which you'll see in just a little bit. The national analysis is interactive. It has come a very long way since it was a big literal paper book that was mailed out to people. It then became a PDF document that was available online, and now it is a fully dynamic, interactive, modern web report that users can really navigate around at their own, based on their own levels of interest and topics of interest, as opposed to something that has to be kind of read through in order. And we've also come a long way in making the data available through different visualization resources so that users can customize what subset of the TRI data they're looking at based on their areas of interest. So with that, I'm going to dive into the data highlights for the 2019 TRI National Analysis. So in summary, one of the main kind of points of TRI that we highlight each year is that TRI data demonstrate that economic growth and improved environmental performance can and do coexist. To that end, facilities implemented over 3,200 new pollution reduction activities in 29, which represents a 4% increase from 2018. And these source reduction success stories that we highlight in the national analysis demonstrate recent and actionable opportunities for knowledge transfer among those facilities and within the different sectors that are covered by TRI. Nationally, the percent of production-related chemical waste generated and managed by TRI facilities that is recycled at those facilities continues to increase, and this is definitely a good news story. Recycling is a more preferred method of managing chemical waste compared to releasing that waste to the environment, which is outlined in the waste management hierarchy in the Pollution Prevention Act. And so seeing an increase in the proportion of chemical waste that is recycled is definitely considered a success from a TRI perspective. The releases of TRI chemicals that are released to air continue to decline. You'll see that there's been a long-term decrease, and that continued in 2019. Since 2007, releases to air have decreased by 756 million pounds, which represents a 57% decrease over those years. And in the last year, that trend continued with a decrease of 23 million pounds from 2018 to 2019. Almost every sector that reports to TRI has reduced their releases to air since 2007. The national analysis includes regional profiles that highlight the geographic diversity of industrial operations in the United States and demonstrate how the industrial sectors that are prevalent in different areas of the US influence what the TRI data look like in those geographic areas. And as always, our aim with the national analysis is to increase the transparency and understanding of TRI information. And we try to accomplish this through our explanation, illustration, and interpretation of TRI information in the report, as well as the interactive embedded tools such as different data visualization applications and widgets to support access and exploration of the TRI data. So looking at the total quantity of production-related waste managed at TRI facilities in 2019, that total decreased by 4% from the previous year to 30.7 billion pounds across the US. Of this total, 89% was not released to the environment because the facilities employed preferred waste management practices such as recycling and treatment instead. All waste management activities decreased by quantity, but as I mentioned a minute ago, the percent of the chemical waste that was recycled has continued to increase nationally. The quantity of chemical waste that was disposed of or otherwise released to the environment decreased by 9% in 2019 to 3.4 billion pounds. This reduction was driven by decreased land disposal at metal mining facilities. However, releases to air also decreased by 4%, while water releases increased by 3%. For 2019, of the 3 billion pounds that were released on site at TRI facilities, 73% was released to land, 20% was released to air, and 7% was released to water. Some new features this year that you'll see when we do our demonstration are a dynamic and interactive executive summary that we are very excited about. We've highlighted a new sector in the industry sector profiles chapter, which is fabricated metals manufacturing. We also developed a new infographic that looks at the whole of the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act and shows how TRI fits into the larger picture of what EPCRA does. We also added a new regional comparison, as well as 2019 is the first year of data on nonylphenol ethoxylates. And so we have new information on that, on those chemicals. So looking now at some trends in the 2019 national analysis, this chart represents the trend since 2007 in total production-related waste managed. And you can see that the different colors in that bar chart represent the different waste management methods. So the red on the bottom is disposal or other releases. The yellow indicates quantity that is treated. The blue is what is burned for energy recovery, and the green is recycling. So as I mentioned earlier, in 2019, the total production release managed decreased by 4% to 30.7 billion pounds. Since 2007, recycling has increased by 78%. And in 2019, facilities reported over 3,200 new pollution reduction projects, which is a 4% increase from 2018, and the first time that that number has increased in 5 years, which is very exciting to see. Looking now at the portion of that chemical waste that was released to the environment by TRI facilities in 2019, that total for last year was 3.4 billion pounds, which represents a 9% decrease from the previous year. And that decrease is largely driven by decreases in land disposal by metal mining facilities. There is typically a lot of fluctuation year to year in the metal mining sector because of the nature of operations at metal mines and the fact that minor changes in the concentration of the naturally occurring TRI chemicals in the rock that they are mining often results in very large fluctuations in their reported releases due to the sheer quantity of the waste rock that is being moved around at metal mining facilities. If we take metal mining out of the picture, then releases overall decreased by 5%, which is driven by decreases in electric utilities, chemical manufacturing, and hazardous waste management facilities. And the colors in the bar chart here indicate the different environmental media to which these TRI releases are being released to. So the green is land releases, the dark blue is water releases, and the light blue are air releases, while the orange portions on top are offsite transfers. And the black line in the graph represents the number of TRI reporting facilities nationwide. So you can see that that number has been very slightly decreasing over the last about 5 years. So looking now at some trends specific to the environmental media, I mentioned earlier that there has been a long-term downward trend in releases of TRI chemicals to air, as reported to the TRI program. In the last year, releases to air decreased by 4% or 23 million pounds, while since 2007, the releases to air have decreased by 756 million pounds. While the decrease from 2008 to 2009 can largely be attributed to the economic recession, the 2019 releases are still lower than 2009 and 2010, despite the economic recovery that has occurred since then. And just to demonstrate one statistic that gets at that point, the 2009 US GDP was $15.2 trillion, whereas the 2018 GDP was $21.4 trillion. And so this speaks to that kind of overarching statement that I mentioned earlier about how TRI data can help to demonstrate that environmental improvements in environmental performance and economic activity and improvement can coexist. Looking now at TRI releases to water, since 2007, surface water discharges of TRI chemicals have decreased by 16% or 38 million pounds, with some fluctuation year to year in between there. In the last year, surface water discharges increased by 3%, which is 5.5 million pounds. And similarly to the air trend, there was a large decrease in 2008 and to 2009 because of the economic recession. But releases in 2019 were lower than in 2009 despite the recovery. And something I will show in the demonstration is that we also look at toxicity weighted releases to water that show an even more steady downward trend when you factor in the toxicity of the chemicals being reported. This graph shows the trend since 2007 in TRI releases to land, including all sectors. So this does include metal mining, which I mentioned is a really influential sector for TRI. And as you can see, there really isn't a meaningful trend here. There's a lot of fluctuation year to year, which is driven by the metal mining sector because their reported releases change quite a bit year to year based on their operations, the concentrations of the chemicals in the rock that they're mining, and other factors. So what we often do when we talk about land releases of TRI chemicals is that we take metal mining out of the picture. So this is now showing that same land release trend, except without metal mining. And you can see that it is a much steadier, very slightly downward trend, as well as that the quantities of land releases that we're talking about are quite a bit smaller. So just to further illustrate the influence that the metal mining sector has on overall national TRI statistics, you can see from this chart that where we look at metal mining on its own, represented by the orange bars, and all of the other TRI reporting sectors represented by the green bars. And you can see that there's a lot of fluctuation year to year in the metal mining releases, whereas all of the other sectors combined have a fairly consistent downward trend since 2007. So over the years, metal mining releases contribute approximately 40% of all TRI releases, and releases from all of the other sectors have consistently decreased since 2007. So the next several slides will look at some new content in the 2019 national analysis. I mentioned earlier that we did a new profile on fabricated metals manufacturing facilities. So this shows just a quick snapshot of a part of what is in that profile on the website, including this infographic that talks about what the sector does and its economic contribution to US GDP, as well as the trend in its releases. And so from 2007 to 2019, total releases from this sector decreased by 14%, largely driven by decreases in their air releases. And one of the reasons that we selected this sector to profile is because the fabricated metal sector is part of the Pollution Prevention Program's Metal Manufacturing and Fabrication National Emphasis Area. And so we wanted to highlight some of the pollution prevention success stories going on within this sector. I also mentioned that we developed a new infographic that looks at the whole of EPCRA, not just TRI. And so this is a quick little preview of it, which I know is far too small to actually read, but you'll see the real thing on the website. And this infographic tries to illustrate the whole of EPCRA and shows how TRI, which is EPCRA Section 313, fits into the larger picture of emergency planning, chemical safety, and community right to know, as illustrated by the other sections of EPCRA and what they cover. We also added a new regional comparison to our section that includes the regional profiles. And because the geographic diversity of industrial operations across the US influences the quantities of TRI chemical waste managed and the management methods used in each region. And so we wanted to illustrate that because these different regions of the United States have different top sectors operating within them, if you look at total production related waste by region, the quote top regions are going to be different than if you look at just total releases by region. I've talked already about how influential the metal mining sector is. The largest metal mine in the US is located in Alaska, which is in region 10. And so if you're looking just at releases by region, region 10 is going to be the top region by quantity of TRI releases. But if you look at total production related waste, including the waste that is recycled, treated, or burned for energy recovery, as well as released to the environment, regions 4, 5, and 6 pop out as much larger than region 10 because of the different sectors that are more common in those regions, like chemical manufacturing, that typically has a large quantity of production related waste, but a smaller proportion of which is released to the environment. I mentioned that 2019 was the first year of reporting for the nonylphenol ethoxylates category. These are surfactants that are used in adhesives, dispersants, cleaners, paints, coatings, and other products. And so this is just a snapshot of what we received for reporting on nonylphenol ethoxylates in 2019. There were 245 facilities that reported 307,000 pounds, almost half of which were chemical manufacturing facilities, followed by hazardous waste facilities at almost a third. And then there's one metal mining facility that is a molybdenum mine that reported on this chemical, and that makes up that 17%. So now I am going to jump over to the actual National Analysis website. Let me try to share my screen here, make sure that I'm sharing the right thing. It's giving me a second. Here we go. So hopefully you are seeing the National Analysis homepage. Here I want to point out a few things and we'll make our way through the website. Here obviously the banner items, we highlight a few main stories that we wanted to point people to, such as our new executive summary that I'll show you in just a minute. Our quick links provide links to what we think are probably useful pieces of information or other resources, such as the TRI program's homepage, the executive summary, the press release that the agency put out when the national analysis was published, a link to download a PDF version of the report's contents. This document, questions and answers, is an FAQ document that covers both questions about this year's national analysis as well as questions about the TRI in general. And then here's the overview presentation link, and this link will take you to the slides that you just saw. So this is where you can access those webinar slides that we just went through. We also include a link to our National Analysis Archive where you can get the PDF version of past year's national analyses going back quite far, pretty much as long as we've been doing this. And then finally, we do make the national analysis available in Spanish. And so this link goes to the Spanish version of the national analysis. Down here, we have sort of our three main panels. This panel shows the high-level chapters within the national analysis. We still refer to them as chapters. That's sort of a throwback to when it was a big PDF report or book. Haven't come up with a new term yet, but these are the main sections of the national analysis. This is a direct link to the Where You Live section, which allows visitors to look at TRI data by state, city, or even down to the zip code level. So it literally is pulling up TRI information for where you live. And then a link to our executive summary. And then down here, we have our quick facts infographic. And this is really high-level TRI in a nutshell. We have a map of where TRI facilities are located this is just showing the continental US, of course. There's another map in the report that I'll show you that allows you to zoom in and you can see how TRI facilities are distributed across the country. This is a snapshot of the 2019 information. So this is the total production-related waste managed in 2019, that 30.7 billion pounds, and how it is broken up by the quantity that was recycled, what was burned for energy recovery, quantity that was treated, and then the slice that was disposed of or otherwise released to the environment, which totaled 3.4 billion pounds. And then we tried to show sort of the relationship between these different quantities that are reported to TRI. So this is the total production waste managed at facilities across the US, the portion that was disposed of or otherwise released, and then the quantities that were transferred off-site, and then the quantities that were released on-site, and how that was distributed among water discharges, air emissions, and land disposal. And so this is just a nice picture that covers a lot of information in a fairly small footprint. So before we move on, I'm going to show you the executive summary, which is new this year, and I have it open here. This is the first year that we have done the executive summary in this storyboard format rather than a PDF. You can see it's already pretty exciting. There's videos instead of just pictures. And as you scroll down, it provides a high-level overview of what is in this 2019 National Analysis Report. And so this describes what TRI is. This is the map that also appears in the Where You Live page, where you can actually select a state or click on a state and pull up high-level statistics about the state for 2019, as well as a link to the fact sheets for that state, which I'll open up in another window. You can change what is displayed. So that was showing releases by state. You can also show releases by metropolitan statistical area, and the shading indicates the quantity of releases. So if you open the legend, you can see that the darker shade of red indicates a higher quantity of releases. And you can also change what is displayed. So this is showing total releases. If you wanted to look at air releases by MSA, you can do that as well. And the colors change to indicate which media we're looking at. Down. Oh, and just to show, this is the fact sheet for Texas, which I opened up by clicking on Texas in the map, and then click the link to show more information about releases in Texas. And it shows the fact sheet, which is now covered up by my WebEx control panel. So I'll come back to that in a second when the panel goes away. Here's that fact sheet, which shows the location of facilities in Texas, some quick facts for the state, how Texas ranks across 56 states and territories, and the production-related waste and releases trends for that state, as well as the top 5 facilities in the state based on total disposal or other releases, and the top 5 chemicals released to air and to water in the state. So back to our executive summary. This is the link to the full report, a map of facility locations, and I mentioned that we would have a dynamic one that allowed users to interact. So this is the first place that occurs. You can zoom in here and click on these different dots, and hopefully you can see that the dots are actually different sizes, and we did that to indicate the relative quantities of TRI releases reported. So the larger dots indicate a facility that reported more TRI chemical waste. And so this is a Clean Harbors waste management facility in Colorado, and you can click on the link to get more information about the facility. Then we also include these national trends in the executive summary that you saw in the slideshow. It's releases. Here is the trend of air releases nationwide from 2007 to 2019 that you saw earlier. Here is a graph that shows new source reduction or pollution prevention activities. This is indicating the activities by chemical, and you can see that the color coding aligns with the different activities. You can also look at source reduction activities by industry sector. So here it looks like computers and electronic products implemented the highest number of new source reduction activities, followed by miscellaneous manufacturing. Here is a snapshot of the 2019 data for total production related managed, the quantity that was recycled, burned for energy recovery, treated, and released. And I mentioned that we profile different industrial sectors in each year's national analysis. So here is a very quick snapshot of some of that information that's presented. This is showing all of the manufacturing sectors, but you can use these buttons to look at the different sectors that are profiled. So this is now the trend for electric utilities, metal mining, chemical manufacturing, and so on. And so as you can see, we have really put in a lot of effort to pack a lot of information into this one executive summary. And then we have obviously the link to visit the full national analysis here at the bottom. And so if there is, we tried to provide sort of a one-stop shopping destination here for your TRI information, and in this executive summary that gives you a high-level picture of the national information for the most recent year. Going back to our full national analysis webpage, here I'll move to our introductory chapter where we have here, and as you can see, once you're in the report, you get this nice left-hand navigation bar that allows you to jump around the website. We have sidebar boxes throughout the report that offer some additional information. For example, this one describes the EPCRA and PPA that created the TRI. We'll move down to an overview of the 2019 TRI data, as well as that same map that you saw in the executive summary, where you can click on these different facility pins and get more information. This links to the facility profile in the TRI Explorer tool. Clicking on the next button, we'll go to the next page where we put together some information on TRI data considerations that are similar to what I mentioned earlier in the slideshow presentation. We also have a link here to that factors to consider document that I mentioned, which is a really valuable resource for anyone who's using TRI data. And this just goes through some of the main considerations that we hope people keep in mind when using TRI data. And then we have that same quick facts infographic that we had on the homepage here. So moving into the pollution prevention and waste management chapter. Once you open up a chapter, you get to see the titles of the subsections within that chapter. I also want to point out that throughout the report, we have these underlined terms. If you click on them, it brings up our glossary definition of some of the more technical terms used throughout the TRI national analysis to try to help with understanding what we're talking about here. We also link to different resources, another link to that factors to consider document where we want to make sure people are using our data to appropriate lengths and making sure that it is as useful as possible. Here we have our section on source reduction activities reported in 2019. Throughout the report, we will link to different tools. So for example, we talk about what specific facilities have implemented for their source reduction activities and then link to facility details in the P2 search tool so that readers can learn more about these specific examples that we're citing. And we also link to the P2 fact sheet as well as other resources throughout the report that we think could be helpful to our readers and data users. Just another feature within this P2 and waste management section are our parent company comparisons. So here we look at, rather than being at the individual facility level, we bring it up to the parent company level and look at the top 10 parent companies by production-related waste management quantities and how their totals have changed from 2018 to 2019. We also provide this information for source reduction activities by parent companies, so you can see which companies have implemented the highest number of source reduction activities in the most recent 2 years. Moving now to the releases section of the national analysis. Here we have some more of those definitions from our glossary, as well as a sidebar box that defines release in more detail, as well as links to EPA's laws and regulations webpage to try to provide a broader understanding of some of our terminology here. So here's that same releases trend chart that you saw. Something that is really cool about the national analysis are that we use what are called high charts on the website that provide some interactivity. And so you can see as I scroll over the bars for each year, it brings up a little pop-up box that includes that specific quantities for the year. You can also customize what you're looking at. So for example, I've talked pretty extensively about how metal mining facilities have very influential and high quantities of land releases that they report each year, and that the fluctuation in land disposal quantities reported by metal mines drives a lot of the fluctuation in total TRI releases year to year. So maybe I just want to get rid of land disposal in this trend and look at what all the other media are doing. So I can click on land disposal and it'll take it out of the chart, and now I'm just seeing the trend in air, water, and off-site releases, which, as you can see, produce a very steady, nice downward trend since 2007 if I take land disposal out. So that's just one example of some of the interactivity that we've built into this site to try to increase its user friendliness and the information that people can glean from exploring the national analysis. Another subsection within this releases chapter is called the hazard and potential risk of TRI chemicals. And here we provide an overview of the factors that influence risk from TRI chemical releases to the environment. And so you can see there's a lot of factors to consider. We also provide an overview of hazard versus risk of chemical releases. And link to our risk screening environmental indicators model, or RISI. This is a screening level model that provides additional context for the human health impacts of TRI release data by considering not just the quantity of the chemical that is released, but that chemical's toxicity, the fate and transport of the chemical through the environment, and the potential human exposure of that release. So RISI produces both a hazard estimate and a risk score, and is a really powerful tool to add a lot of context to TRI's straight release quantity information. And the RISI website provides much more information about how to use RISI and what it covers. And these are some high-level notes about it. So speaking of RISI, something I want to point out that we do here in the national analysis is in our air and water release trend. This is that air release trend that you saw in the both in the webinar slides and in the executive summary. But here, right now it's showing pounds released. You can also look at the RISI score of air release pounds, which factors in toxicity. And you can see that it does change slightly. It is still very downward of a trend since 2007. If we look at the water releases, this is the trend showing just straight TRI release quantities of water discharges across the US since 2007. But if we click on the RISI score, it's very different. And you can see that the RISI weighted RISI score is lower each year, and that there's been a more of a downward trend, except in the last few years. And the bullet points underneath each graph provide some information around what is shown in the graph and some explanation as to potentially which facilities or sectors are driving some of these trends across the country. We also have a section in the releases chapter called Chemicals of Special Concern. This is where we take a closer look at some TRI chemicals that are of particular concern due to their potential effects on human health and the environment, such as the PBT chemicals, as well as known or suspected human carcinogens. And so I mentioned earlier that reporting thresholds for the PBT chemicals are lower than for other TRI chemicals, and it ranges by chemical, but those thresholds range from 10 pounds to 100 pounds for most PBTs, or to 0.1 grams for dioxin and dioxin-like compounds, because they are so highly toxic. So here we have trends in releases of lead, mercury, and dioxin, as well as OSHA carcinogens. And one new piece of information this year is an ethylene oxide releases trend. Ethylene oxide is an OSHA carcinogen, and in 2019, EPA announced a variety of actions to address emissions of ethylene oxide. We link to more information about that here. And this is a trend since 2007 of releases of ethylene oxide across the US. And as you can see, the vast majority of ethylene oxide releases are going to air. And there has been a decrease of about 29% since 2007, with some fluctuation in between there. And there's some bullet points about our data on ethylene oxide. Another section of the national analysis worth looking at is our industry sector profiles. Here we profile manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, fabricated metals manufacturing, metal mining, electric utilities, and federal facilities, and provide an infographic like you saw in the slides for each of those sectors, as well as their facility locations in the US and their waste management and release trends. So here's that, release trend for electric utilities. The regional profiles are a new feature in the last couple of years. There are 10 EPA regions across the US, and so these profiles contain the TRI kind of a little mini analysis for each region. And then TRI and beyond is the last sort of content heavy section I wanted to point out. This is where we include the EPCRA infographic that I mentioned earlier, where it's a little bit more legible for people, that looks at an overview of the different sections of EPCRA, what they do, the different types of commissions and committees involved in implementing the other sections of EPCRA, as well as what facilities report under these different sections. And so here, section 313 is TRI, but sections 302, 303, 304, and 311 and 312 are very different. And so this looks at what is in those reports, what is an emergency response plan. And as we mentioned earlier, TRI is used for TSCA risk evaluations. This is a high-level overview of how TRI data can help to inform prioritization, risk evaluation, and risk management activities under TSCA. And then we mentioned earlier that we are involved in a lot of international pollutant release and transfer register activities around the world. TRI was the very first PRTR, national PRTR in the world, but since its inception in 1986, there have been national PRTR programs implemented in over 50 other countries, which is very exciting to see. And we, as the program, have been involved with various internationally focused organizations and projects that look at different uses of PRTR data around the world and how PRTR data can be used to do things like assess progress towards specific UN Sustainable Development Goals that have to do with chemical safety and different things. So this is a graphic looking at releases of 14 priority pollutants across 7 different PRTR programs and how their total quantities have decreased from 2008 to 2017, for example. The last section of the website that I want to show you before we go to the Q&A is the Where You Live section, which allows you to pull up TRI data where you live, as the name indicates. And here, this is that same interactive map you saw in the executive summary. And you can look at release information by state, metropolitan area, by large aquatic ecosystem, or you can look at TRI facilities that are located on tribal land. You can also use these subsections here to pull up different cuts of TRI information, for example, quick facts about facilities on tribal land, as well as this embedded dashboard where you can, still loading, you can look at more information about TRI data reported by facilities that are located on tribal land. But the real main point of this section is this map where you can search your state or enter your zip code and pull up TRI information for these very granular areas down to the zip code level or at the city or county level. So one more thing I forgot to mention is within the releases chapter, we have a link to our national analysis data visualization application. Second page, it is allows you to further explore the most recent year of TRI information and customize what you're looking at. So this is one small portion of that widget where you can select a specific industry or multiple industries to look at, or a specific chemical or a specific state, and customize what is shown here. But you can also look at the full click visualization dashboard that features the national analysis data, but allows you to customize what you are looking at. And so here you can filter for different industry sectors, chemicals, that we feature the most recent 2 years in this dashboard, the different states, territories, or EPA regions, as well as different release media. So if you only wanted to look at air or water or land or offsite transfers, you can do that here. And these different tabs show you different portions of the data. So this page is focused on releases, and because I don't have anything selected, this is showing all sectors and all chemicals and all states. And you can see the top industry bear releases, top chemicals being released, the map showing the states with the highest quantities of releases, and then similarly the waste management tab. And so if you are interested, for example, in releases from a particular sector, you could select that here, and all of the graphs would change to reflect your selection. So now I'm looking just at chemical manufacturing and how, these are the top chemicals being released by this one sector. And these are the subsectors within that 3-digit NAICS code. You can see that Texas, followed by Louisiana, have the highest number of releases for that sector. And so this just enables people to really customize the portions of TRI data that they're looking at for the most recent year. So with that, I am going to open it up to questions and answers. Hopefully we've had some questions coming in that our panelists are managing.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. As Caitlin mentioned, we will now move into our question and answer session, which will go until 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And as a reminder, you can submit questions using the question and answer panel. And please remember to send your questions to all panelists. I will read questions aloud, as well as answers that have been provided in writing. And then members of the TRI team will unmute themselves to answer the question or chime in with some more details. So I'll now move to our first question, which is, are there any reporting requirements under TRI for on-site waste transfer if an industrial site has an on-site incinerator or landfill, or if waste is created, transported, and disposed of within the property boundaries of a single site, are they exempt from reporting requirements on that waste? So we do have an answer to this question. So if a facility meets reporting requirements, for example, industry sector, FTEs, and chemical activity, then they'll have to report all releases and other waste management activities. And this includes both on-site releases and waste management and waste transfers off-site. So in other words, if they dispose of or incinerate waste on-site, that does not negate any reporting obligations. So we also had another question. Are the tools available for academic researchers available to other members of the public as well? And the answer to this is yes, the tools are all available for use by the general public.
Yes, and I just want to chime in there and point out our data and tools webpage, because all of our tools are available to anyone who would like to use them. We just sort of try to help tailor our different web resources for different audiences, but our tools are available to anybody, and this is our data and tools page, which lists all of our different data access tools and try to categorize them based on kind of what their main topic area or their output is. And so you can see the national analysis is listed here. Tools for most users, tools for advanced users. Here's where anyone can download the total data files, the basic data files, or the basic plus. Something I would like to point out for everyone is that in the basic data files page, we have a link to the documentation for this. And even if you're not using the Excel-based basic data files, this documentation can be really helpful in understanding TRA terminology. Some of our terms are pretty technical, and so I just wanted to point out this resource for anyone who's using our tools and might need a little bit of assistance in understanding some of the nuances and the terms involved.
Great, thank you. I'll now read the next question on our list. So have you ever caught companies misrepresenting their releases? And if so, how did you find out? And we provided some links to press releases about enforcement actions EPA has taken, as well as EPA finds issues via data quality processes. So I can put those links into the chat for everyone to see, but I don't know if anyone on the TRI team has anything additional to add there. And if you are answering, you might be muted, just a note.
Sarah, I think we can move on to the next one.
Okay. Great. So during the presentation, it was mentioned that TRI does not look at human exposure to reported chemicals. So if TRI doesn't look at this data, are there other programs that do look at it and analyze human exposure?
Well, this is Steve DeVito. I can answer that. So the TRI emissions data are used by other parts of the agency, well, even our own office within Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics to help characterize exposures. We don't, the TRI program itself doesn't do that, nor do we have any information on our website that speaks to exposure, using TRI data to to convert it into exposure values. Now, our RISI, our risk screening environmental indicators tool, does have the capability of estimating doses, and I don't want to get into it too technically here, but the short answer is no. But other programs within the agency do use TRI data, the emissions data, to as an aid in estimating exposure.
And Steve
And
Whitkin here. I'll also add to that. Thank you, Steve DeVito. A lot of our data is used by a lot of the public researchers who do look at potential exposure. And the TRI data is a source and it's a step in the process. But as Steve said, the TRI program does not look at exposure, but we're providing the data which feeds into a lot of additional research outside the TRI program.
And just, I'm sorry to add to this. This is Stephanie Griffin. To answer one of the follow-up questions to that, which programs or which data sets would look at workplace exposure, I'd recommend you to look at the TSCA CDR, Chemical Data Reporting Program. Our colleagues in the CDR program do collect ranges of workers that are exposed in certain manufacturing sites.
Great, thank you. So our next question is, what happens to revisions and or late forms submitted after October? And is that data ever captured in the national analysis? And so the answer to that is data received by EPA too late to be included in the October national analysis frozen data set for a given reporting year, and therewith the TRI national analysis for that year are made available to the public the following March, following the March data refresh, through EnviroFacts and other online tools and sources made available by EPA for accessing and analyzing TRI data. Also, these data will be incorporated and contained in the following year's national analysis frozen data set.
Thank you. And I'll add, Steve Whitkin again, I'll add to that. The TRI program is unique among data collection programs. So when you look at 2019 data next year, it will include any of the updates. So with the TRI program, we break out the year for the national analysis, which is a focus at a point in time. But one of the data elements is the reporting year. And so that data element does get updated more or less on a continuous process throughout or multiple times throughout the year. So he said prior year numbers will be revised each time there is a data update. However, the national analysis itself is a lock snapshot, primarily so you can keep some sanity instead of having the numbers constantly changing on you. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Great, thank you. So the next question on our list is, does the TRI team look at trends related to how many manufacturers and businesses typically report to TRI each year?
Was that answered in writing at all, or should I jump in there?
I don't believe that was answered in writing, so feel free to jump in.
Okay, thanks. The short answer is yes, we do look at the number of facilities reporting in for different subsets of TRI, including for the different industry sectors. We don't always include that information in the national analysis trend charts, other than the total number of facilities reporting nationwide. But we do look at the number of facilities, especially to inform any changes in the quantity reported for excuse me, a given sector, so that, you know, for example, if there is a large decrease in reported releases for a given sector, one of our first things to do would be to look at the number of facilities that reported for that year versus previous years to see if part of that decrease can be attributed to the number of facilities reporting rather than decreases in releases at those facilities. So number of facilities is factored in to our analyses and summaries at various levels, depending on what the data are telling us each year.
Great, thank you. The next question, Caitlin, if it's not too much work to get to it, could you show where to find the EPCRA infographic that you showed earlier?
Yes, absolutely. I know I went through very quickly, especially towards the end there. I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. So here we're on the National Analysis homepage. That EPCRA infographic is in the TRI and Beyond chapter, so you can go directly there from the homepage. And then it's called More on EPCRA. And so if you go to TRI and Beyond and then More on EPCRA, that will bring up the page with this infographic.
Great, thank you. And I can also put that link into the chat for everyone. So our next question asks if the TRI team could share additional information on the reporting of NPE in the food sector. So for example, where and how NPEs are used in the food industry.
This is Steve DeVito. I can take a stab at answering the question. Well,
So,
they're used.
Steve, while you're answering, I'm just going to pull up that the click dashboard and put in
good.
those things so we can see.
Okay,
as
I'll
well.
wait for you to
Why
do
don't,
that.
well, if you have some ideas that you want to talk through verbally, go ahead while I'm
Oh,
doing
okay.
this. Yeah.
Okay, let's do that then. So, you know, nonylphenol methoxylates, they're used as surfactants, which surfactant is just a fancy way of saying they work to bring chemicals that normally don't mix very well together. It helps them mix better. So they're used in many different types of formulations. So I would imagine that in the food industry, food manufacturing industry, where a lot of cleaning is done, you know, a lot of detergents and soaps and all sorts of cleaning products are used, I would imagine that some of those products contain nonylphenol ethoxylates. And that might explain why, at least part of the reason why we see reports from the food manufacturing industry.
Mm-hmm.
So Caitlin, I see something's coming up now.
Yeah, so I just as a sample search on this click dashboard for national analysis data, I filtered for NAICS 311, the food manufacturing sector, and nonylphenol ethoxylates as a chemical group. And while this is not going to tell you how the specific facilities are using those chemicals, it might at least provide some information in addition to Steve's hypotheses about how those chemicals are being used. So, for example, looking at releases, it looks like 100% of nonylphenol ethoxylates reported by the food industry was transferred off-site of that, what was released. The majority of the nonylphenol ethoxylate waste that was managed was treated. This is just for and then this shows releases by industry. So you can see the subsectors within the food manufacturing sector that reported. It's mostly wet corn milling for releases, but then at production related waste side, it is largely dry, condensed, and evaporated dairy product manufacturing. You can look at dive into just the releases portion. Most of it is happening up in Minnesota. And here again, it just shows that it's all transferred off-site.
Thank you, Caitlin.
again,
And Steve
yeah.
Wickton, I'll add another piece of information which is not in the national analysis. It's data we will look at. When facilities submit data to us, there are actually two parts of their submission process which are optional free text fields. So if a facility has implemented a pollution prevention practice or is unable to, they may describe what barriers may be to implementing P2 or what they have done successfully in some more details in free text form.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a miscellaneous free text field where companies do provide us information occasionally on more specific details on their processes that they think will help us understand their release information. That data is available through some of the EnviroFacts queries, which we're not going to get to here. That's really digging a little deeper than what we intend to do with this webinar, but the information is all publicly available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Steve, that's a great segue. Looking at on this click dashboard here, I'm on the facilities list, and these are all the facilities that reported nonylphenol ethoxylate releases, and this is a link to that P2 report in EnviroFacts that Steve just mentioned. And so here you can see that it's just this one facility in Minnesota reported all of the releases of nonylphenol ethoxylates in this sector. So you could use this dashboard to link to their P2 report or look up their TRI facility ID. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. To learn more about what might be going on at that facility. And just as a plug here, I want to point out the Contact Us link that appears on all of our websites. That shoots us an email directly. So if you have a follow-up question after this webinar, or we didn't address it, something you might be wondering, you can click on this link and that will send an email directly to my inbox. And we will work to get you a complete answer as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you. So we had a few questions that came in while you were showing the where you live map tool. And the first one is, do you know the mapping software that was used to create that map?
This was built in using EPA's Geo platform, which I believe is based on Esri ArcGIS.
Great, thank you. And another one that came in while you were showing this map is, can the data be sorted by chemical type?
Chemical type meaning like organic versus non-organic, or solvent or carcinogen versus PBT versus non-carcinogen. Not sure if there was a follow-up.
I'm not seeing any follow-up. So I guess just if there's any way you can sort any chemicals here that might be of interest.
Gotcha. So I don't believe so. This, I think there are other tools that allow you to do more. This mapping interface, we kept at a pretty high level to keep it kind of as user-friendly as possible. But we have other mapping tools in the agency, such as EnviroMapper and EJ Screen, and there might be some other ones where you could potentially filter for specific chemicals. I'm not positive. However, something that is not quite as granular as this, but does allow you to sort chemicals, is on this dashboard. If you, I can clear all my selections here, but there is a the map under releases that shows kind of that same chloropleth, and you can select specific chemicals or multiple chemicals using these filters that would then be reflected in this map. So maybe that helps slightly, but sorry, I'm not sure that that level of specificity is available on a TRI map.
Thank you, Caitlin. And not so much for mapping, and I'm not sure if your tool, I don't think you have it, but some of the other TRI tools, which are more table related, some have some maps. We do have some chemical groupings, a limited number. We have a grouping, and what we do is the data exists in the database, and if they belong to a particular group, we then flag it. So we have flags for the hazardous air pollutants, OSHA carcinogens, PBT chemicals, and chemicals which are listed as CERCLA hazardous substances. So you may have to go to another tool to dig into some of those queries. But we do provide some.
Thanks for that, Steve. Yeah, and I know the TRI Explorer search tool is the one that comes to mind that does offer those different groupings of chemicals that Steve mentioned. So that's another resource that's available.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in about this map, an attendee writes, also a concern and of interest to the public is that the where you live map information seems to be bound by zip code, but that is not reflective of the reality of air and water releases. Does the TRI team have any plans to change or address that?
That's a great point. And yes, absolutely. You know, TRI chemical releases do not stay within zip code boundaries. Really, the utility of the zip code option, from my perspective, is to allow you to identify TRI reporting facilities that are located near your area of concern. And then from there, you can learn what those facilities are reporting to TRI. We aren't trying to indicate that those facility releases are necessarily staying within the bounds of a given zip code. But a fairly recent TRI resource that is available is our TRI homepage search and search plus tool. So now I'm on the TRI program homepage rather than the national analysis. And down here is this new TRI search interface where it allows the user to input, you know, based on their state, county, or zip code, but also look at a certain mile radius around that zip code. So once you have results pulled up, you can select how many miles of a radius you would like around that search location. And we added that functionality specifically to try to get at the concern that you're sharing about how chemical pollution doesn't necessarily stay within our you know, census group or zip code or state boundaries as drawn on a map.
Great, thank you.
Sarah Chadwick, I just wanted to chime in just quickly because there have been some questions about our tools and environmental justice information. I just wanted to point out that the TRI search and search plus tools, the screen that is open now, if you look in the left side, there's EJ screen information. Those are questions that are further down in the Q&A, but we do have some incorporation of EJ screen and EJ mapping in this search tool.
Thanks, Judy. I think that's a great segue into some of our questions about EJ Screen and environmental justice. So one attendee asked and said, Executive Order 14008 calls for a climate and economic equity screening tool, and EJ Screen probably will be a template for this new tool. And will TRI data become part of this new screening tool? And in answer, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee will focus on development of the new tool that will focus on climate and economic data. And so the EPA OEJ will continue to focus on use and improvement of EJ Screen. And at some point, it is expected that the two tools will be merged and the TRI data that are in EJ Screen would be included. I don't know, Judy, if you or any others on the team have anything to add to that.
Yeah, this is Judy, and I answered that question just based on some of my knowledge from some of the meetings that I've been part of at the agency on EJ. I'm not sure exactly when WEJAC, which is the White House Environmental Council, when they'll be rolling out their tool, but their tool focuses a little bit more on climate and economic data, where we have more, well, our Office of Environmental Justice is a little bit different from that. But I was on a meeting with Matthew Tejada, and he basically said that we're going to focus on EJ Screen, and we realized that there are two tools, and they're a little bit different, even though I think the new tool will be based on EJ Screen. And we're hoping as we go forward, we'll use both of those tools, but at some point we'll merge and use one tool. I don't know exactly when and how that's going to happen, but I hope that helps to answer the question.
Thanks, Judy.
Great, thank you. On a related note, an attendee asked, beyond this type of meeting, how is the TRA team planning to reach out to EJ communities or communities in general to understand their needs?
I'm sorry, this is Judy again. Can you repeat that quickly? I'm sorry.
Sure. So this attendee is asking how the TRI team is planning to reach out to EJ communities and communities in general to understand their needs.
I'll hop on
Right.
that one, Judy,
Oh,
if you want to.
Well, let me just start, Steve, just that we really are at the beginning here with environmental justice within OPPT, and TRI really is a great tool that we can use. There isn't a whole lot more in OPPT, although all of the divisions in the pollution prevention and toxics have developed proposals to focus specifically on environmental justice, and those have been submitted to Michal Friedhoff, who is the assistant administrator in our office. It's the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. So right now, the TRI Search and Search Plus, which you're looking at now on the homepage, was developed with EJ and communities in mind, but we hope to go far beyond this. And some of the regional offices are actually doing webinars that focus specifically on EJ. We do think that TRI is a great tool for environmental justice, and hope to be moving forward with more activities on that front. Go ahead, Steve, if you have something.
Yeah. And this is a question which really has a lot of the TRI staff kind of chafing at the bit. We really would love to jump out and work with the communities directly, but we also realize we are not the experts in the EJ communities. We have always worked very closely with our Office of Environmental Justice. So they will go into communities many times, and they will work with us ahead of time, collecting TRI data, trying to fashion a better way of how to present it to the community. What does the data mean? We also, as Judy said, work with our regional offices who are more in tune to what the boots on the ground in their communities. And we work back and forth with all our regional offices as much as they contact us, let us know what's going on, to make sure they have the information they need. So I speak with many of my coworkers. We would love to be at the local meetings, but we usually will use other EPA proxies to represent the TRI data. We just keep working, trying to make the TRI data more compatible with the tools that they need. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We still have a few questions left that we haven't answered. The next one on the list is, could you show again how to get a report on releases for a specific industry sector?
Sure. So there are a few different ways to go about that. I'm going to go back to the national analysis here. There we go. So one, depending on which industry sector you're looking at, we do these industry sector profiles in the national analysis. So if the sector that you are particularly interested in happens to be one of these handful, like chemical manufacturing, then this subsection of the national analysis would be really informative to you in looking at where those facilities are located, what its data look like for the most recent year, the trend, the trend in both waste management here as well as releases is all captured for you in this profile. However, if, for example, you're most interested in a different sector that doesn't happen to be one of the ones that we profile, then one option would be to look at the click dashboard here, which is this. You can clear all the selections and you can select one or more specific industry sectors from this list and generate the resulting graphics on these different topics just for that sector. However, something else that would be useful is if you go to the TRI Explorer page on our, from our data and tools, then TRI Explorer is one of my personal favorites. And it has these dynamically generated fact sheets that you can get to from this fact sheet tab up here. And one of the selection options is to select industry as your topic of interest. And then that brings up the drop-down menu of all of our industry sectors. And say I want to look at paper, this will generate a really nice, tidy fact sheet that prints out on both sides of one piece of paper and contains an overview of the TRI data for this industry sector, which has a lot of similarities to what is contained in the dashboard, but is a little bit more printer friendly and portable if that's what you're looking for, and has the high level trends in both releases and waste management, as well as the top sectors and the top chemicals. So there are a few different ways to get at what could be considered a summary or profile or report of different industry sectors.
And Caitlin, thank you. You just brought up a nice segue, which I want to help people understand. Even though we talk about going to maybe a different tool, we have a large number of tools. A lot of our tools are also interlinked. Well, one, they all start with this exact same database. So it's not like we have 20 different sets of data. It's more the look and feel and what the features are included. But these tools also interlink to each other in several instances. So you may be starting in a TRI Explorer webpage, but you may end up to an EnviroFacts Form R report. With certain ways, when you click some of the information, we take you from tool to tool when we think it's the most appropriate thing to do. So you're not locked into just one source. There's many ways, and they do when we can, they interlink to one another.
Thanks, Steve.
Sarah?
That's a great point.
Great, thank you. We are getting to the end of our time, so we're going to ask one more question. And that is, with the addition of PFAS to TRI in 2020 and the current national and international interests, will PFAS be a chemical of special interest, special concern in the 2020 TRI national analysis?
That is a great question. And I cannot tell you for certain what may or may not be included in the 2020 national analysis, because as with any large agency, there is a management chain that has to approve the specific content for each year's report in terms of what we are including as special features and that kind of thing. But given the the high level of interest, as you mentioned, around the PFAS chemicals and the fact that it will be the first year of reporting for the PFAS chemicals, I think it is fairly likely that we will be featuring some type of focus on PFAS within the 2020 national analysis, whether it is in the chemicals of special concern or in another section. I think it's a pretty safe bet that we'll have some discussion on our first year of PFAS reporting.
Great, thank you so much. Before we close out the webinar, I do just want to open the floor to the TRI members on the phone if they have any closing remarks.
Hey, Sarah, this is Sarah Swenson. I just wanted to plug 2 opportunities for people to give the TRI program feedback. We are looking for your input on the main TRI website and what you like about it and how we could improve it to make it better for you. You can get the link to the survey from our homepage, www.epa.gov/TRI. It's in the scrolling banner at the top. It'll take you right to the survey. Thank you. So we would love your input on that. And then we're also looking for input on how people are using TRI data. So we are collecting summaries and short examples of what people are doing with TRI. And right now that is on the, Sarah, if you would go to, just click any link and it'll bring up the sidebar menu. Or Caitlin or whoever is currently controlling.
Yeah, I'm driving right now.
Thank you. It's under Find, Understand, and Use.
Find, understand, and use. What you
And
can
then,
do?
now, if you go to Find, Understand, and Use,
Okay, oh, the main one.
and then it's toward the middle, Share Your TRI Story under.
Here we go.
So if anyone out there is actively using TRI, we would really like to know how you're using it. And that will help us tailor our training materials and help other data users. And we'll also be sharing these examples as part of our 35th anniversary kind of campaign later this year. So you can email us a short summary, and that would be really, really helpful, not only to EPA, but also, like I said, other people using TRI. So I just wanted to mention those 2 opportunities. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thanks, Sarah. It's a great plug.
Yeah, and Sarah, you actually missed one plug I thought you were going to make. A lot of the questions there's a lot of questions of the pup you all have, and sometimes the words that you're thinking of and we write, we don't always interpret the exact same way. So a lot of times we really have to, it really needs a discussion between you and us to help you get to where you need to be in the most efficient manner. And we don't want to see you struggle with the TRI data. So please use the email tri.help. As Caitlin says, she sees that, Sarah sees that, I think a handful of other folks. And if they cannot get you an answer quickly, they will pass it on to others. But please engage us for the dialogue, because it's really a conversation we need to have so you get what is useful for your work. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great reminder, Steve. And I'll just, repeat, please do use the contact us link. Please email tri.help@epa.gov. As we've mentioned, it comes straight to us, and we love hearing from you. We absolutely love to find out how people are using TRI data and help make sure that you're getting the data that best suits your needs. So please don't hesitate if you do need any assistance or have additional questions following this webinar.
And this is Steve DeVito, and I would like to thank Caitlin Briere for giving such an outstanding presentation, and the entire EPA TRI team that is on the line and that assisted with answering the questions. So thank you all, and Kayla and Sarah, thank you for your help with this and organizing this and putting this all together. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. If there are no other comments from the TRI team, I just want to thank all the participants for joining, and you may now disconnect.
Thank you so much.